When we work with if statements, we use conditions that might have multiple pieces, but they always evaluate to either true or false. Any combination of variables and operators is called an expression. We can evaluate an expression by following the rules of the operators until we get a single value result. Most expressions you've seen are math expressions. They use operators like plus and minus and result in a number. But if the expression uses operators like is equal to or less than to evaluate to true or false, we call them Boolean expressions, named after George Boole, an English mathematician. Let's look at an example problem that uses Boolean expressions. I like to play softball in a league of men and women, where they have certain rules about the balance between men and women that can be on the field at one time. For example, you must have at least 7 players present to start a game, and at least 4 of them must be women. So let's look at some starter code. This program asks for the user to give the number of men and the number of women that are playing and computes the total number of players. So now let's add code to determine if we can start a game. We want to check if 2 things are both true. First, if the total is greater than or equal to 7, and second, if the number of women is greater than or equal to 4. We can do this in Python by using the AND operator, like this. We're going to put it inside of an if statement and say if total is greater than or equal to 7 and women is greater than or equal to 4, then we're going to print you can play. If that isn't true, then we're going to print you cannot play a legal game. All right, so if only one of the conditions needs to be true, we could use an OR operator instead. So we would put OR in place of AND. But that's not what we want, so we're going to keep it as AND. Let's see if our code works. Let's run it, and we'll use 3 men and 2 women. We cannot play. We don't have enough players, and we don't have enough women. So let's try some different numbers. Let's run it and use 5 men, 3 women. Oh, we still cannot play. That's because we have enough players, but we don't have enough women. So we still can't play. So let's try it one more time. This time, we'll play with 3 men and 4 women. Ah, we could play. Now let's talk about AND and OR for a minute. When we use AND between 2 things, like in this example, both must be true for the AND to evaluate to true. So total has to be greater than 7, and women has to be greater than 4. And actually, they both have to be greater than or equal to their numbers. Otherwise, it evaluates to false. When we use OR, only one of the 2 needs to be true for the whole expression to evaluate to true. So either could be true or both could be true, and the OR would evaluate to true. When both are false, OR evaluates to false. As you can see, each one of these expressions, whether the small parts or the combined one, ultimately evaluates to true or false, and our code will print the appropriate message based on whether the final result is true or false. So let's talk about Boolean variables now. Just like we can save the result of numeric calculations into a number variable to use later in the program, we can also save the result of these Boolean expressions into a Boolean variable. A Boolean is always true or false. When we use Booleans, it's good practice to give them a good name that signifies that the variable has a true or false value. For example, I can create some variables for having enough players or having enough women. So let's do that up here. Has enough players, and we'll set it equal to total greater than or equal to 7. So has enough players will be true if the total is greater than or equal to 7. Let's create another one. Has enough women. And we'll set it equal to women greater than or equal to 4. So it will be true if women is greater than or equal to 4. Now my program can refer back to the Boolean variables whenever needed, without the computer having to recompute the true or false. Let's update our if expression to use these variables. So instead of saying total greater than or equal to 7, we will say has enough players. And instead of saying women, we'll say has enough women. Now let's run it and see what's going on. We'll use the debugger this time. So let's set a breakpoint on our first line and go ahead and run the debugger on our Python file. Now our debugger window pops up on the left and we can step through and answer the questions as we get to them. So how many men are there? Let's say there's 3. Hit enter. Now we need to execute that line. How many women are there? Let's say there's 3. Hit enter. Now it's going to add them together. So we can see our total updated to 6. Now watch what happens to has enough players and has enough women. Has enough players evaluates to false. Has enough women evaluates to false also. And that should mean that our if statement will go to the else. And it does. And now it's going to print, we cannot play a legal game. For this simple example, we don't need to use those Boolean variables, but if the expressions were more complicated, or if we were going to use the result in several other places in our program, it might be a good idea to use them. There's one more Boolean operator called not that you should know about. You can put not in front of any Boolean expression to say you are interested in the opposite condition. For example, I could say, at the end of my code, if not has enough players, then I'm going to print another message. Ask the other team if they want to practice. Because maybe they'll want to play a practice game. The actual language here is a little awkward, but by using good variable names like this, the program actually reads very clearly. Let's run this with the debugger and show the values. This time, I'm not going to put my breakpoint at the beginning because it makes it a little hard to step through. So let's put it here after we ask for all the inputs. Now we're going to debug, and it should ask me for how many men. I'm going to put 2 this time. And for women, I'm going to put 4. Now we can step through the rest of the code and see how our values update in the debugger window. It printed, you cannot play a legal game because we only had 6 players. But now let's see if our if statement with the not works. We didn't have enough players, but the not reversed the false to a true. So now our print statement is going to execute. And there we have it. Ask the other team if they want to practice. The final thing to note about using Boolean operators is that there is an order of precedence, just like there is with math operators. Not is evaluated first, and is next, or is last. So you have to be careful when combining these in an expression and use parentheses when needed. Boolean variables and Boolean expressions seem simplistic at first because they are just true and false. They can become confusing though when our expressions become more complex, but they turn out to be very powerful tools in programming. Try thinking up your own problem to solve with Booleans, and remember to use the debugger when you're not sure what's happening with your code.